Next up, we're going to hear from our Immersion Project teams. If you're not familiar, the Immersion Project is a partnership that Bloomberg started with NYC Media Lab. And we pair our Ph.D. students in data science-related fields with nonprofits to work on tightly defined data challenge. They work on the project over the summer and then present here. So here we are. First, we just have a quick video, and then we'll hear from the Love City Strong Immersion Project team. They're up here. We have Stephen Libbey, Gouthami, Matt Harrington, and Mandy Lemley.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a data scientist from Columbia University, and we're here on St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands, to help out Love City Strong with their data needs.
Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Secunda Family Foundation have been supporting Love City Strong since its inception in their efforts to recover and rebuild the U.S. Virgin Islands in the aftermath of the storms. Love City Strong has been working in partnership with the CDC and the U.S. Virgin Islands Health Department to do a study of water quality in cisterns that exist in homes throughout the territory. We had the opportunity to do a ride-along with Love City Strong and their partners at the CDC, the Health Department, and just got this great insight into what they're looking at each day as they collect this data. All right, ready to do our first survey on St. Thomas.
The CDC is primarily trying to provide technical assistance in addition to helping frame the study and putting all of the expertise together, from the water quality testing to the statistical design.
They've done a great job collecting the data, and they've done a great job bringing it together, but it's not always so obvious to answer these kind of questions without some sort of data science methodology. So I'm trying to help inform these questions that might not have such obvious answers.
It is challenging at times to knock on someone's door and have them allow a team of 5 people to come into their home and open up their cistern and come in with all these tools that they don't quite understand. This is where we bring back our water samples. We're taking tap and cistern samples and testing them for E. coli and various other bacteria.
It's looking like it should be over 70% of the water that we tested have tested positive for E. coli and coliforms. We are also going to be able to utilize the total coliform and the E. coli contaminant data, because that will be more readily available to us as they start to process that over the next week or so.
The Ph.D. Immersion Fellowship has really helped give me the perspective of working very closely in the field on the ground. And that's not something that I've ever done before. It's a nice step out of academia for a little bit.
The Immersion program is really a great opportunity for the student to take a step back from their screens, their spreadsheets, all the important databases that they're looking at, and get out in the field with a nonprofit manager and see what that data looks like in real life and on the ground. Just a reminder to the students that data is really founded in something tangible on the ground. It's human, it's environment, it's all these factors that nonprofits and cities are dealing with on a regular basis. But to take that step back from the spreadsheet and the numbers, I just think adds a really different element when thinking about how data can be used for good. Group on the presentation.
Yes, so we're just going to kind of go through a brief sort of background on these cisterns. So the video did a great job of describing sort of the full study that we actually had done, but in 2017, in September, I think we all remember very clearly that there were 2 Category 5 hurricanes that hit. USVI. And so Irma and Maria had a really severe impact on the economy, but also in general for people's health. There were a lot of folks that were being sick, and one of the topics that kept coming up was household cisterns. So this is a different type of water that are in households in Virgin Islands, and what it effectively is a roof catchment system. So there's rainwater that's caught on the roof and then is sort of funneled through gutters and then into a downspout. And you can kind of see in this picture here that there's a sort of an underground like pool, essentially. So it's a lot of water. I mean, thousands of gallons of water. And so during the hurricanes, and for people's response to it, people were accessing this water because they may not have received bottled water in times. And so anecdotally, we've been trying to gather more data, more information around household cisterns. So there was a community assessment that was done in 2017, 2018, and they had found that 12.5%, 8.9% of households were hearing messaging around cisterns and cistern treatment. And what was really happening was at CDC, we had not actually been able to get enough data to come up with really sound treatments on how people should be disinfecting the cistern water. We did know that small water volume is an effective form of disinfection, but the questions around what is this water quality, and we didn't have solid answers to that. So we knew that we needed to get additional information. And so we had started a pilot study with the strong collaboration with the local health department, USVI Department of Health, and Love City Strong. I mean, the teams that had to come together to really put all of this work was very intense. And so before we did sort of our full-scale study, we had to pilot. And piloting is an incredibly important aspect of data collection. I think we all know if you've done a questionnaire once and you collect your information, you think of 10 other reasons why you should fix it the next time. So piloting was a way for us to be able to test our methods and see, the timing, how long it would take for us to kind of work in these different households. So we did a convenience sample of this, and we visited 25 households, 19 on St. Croix, 4 on St. Thomas, and 2 on St. John. And again, that was also a tactic for us to understand how you collect a sample on St. Thomas and get it over to St. Croix, or go from St. John to St. Thomas, and the travel times incorporated. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to put that together for the full study, which I actually saw in the video. And so some of the initial data that we're catching from this is we're noticing there's like a huge variety in the ways that people are treating their water. Again, this is the pilot study, so we know that we have to kind of dive further into this investigation in terms of how people are actually treating their water. You see bleach usage, boiling, filtering, and UV light. Some of these are more effective than others. For example, boiling your water or filter plus UV is going to be a very important sort of combination. So we're noticing just a huge variety, so that also is going to inform the messaging that we have to give. And our primary question that we're basing everything off of is, what is the prevalence of E. coli in these cisterns? E. coli is a fecal indicator bacteria. And so that is what is used to identify if there has been fecal contamination in water. It is an EPA approved method, and the standards are both EPA and WHO. So what we noticed in the pilot study is that about 64% overall of these households have E. coli in their water. So the additional work we need to get into, and which is why we did a larger study, was to look at if this number is still holding true, and also eventually we have to sort of pair this information with the treatment results and see if people are not treating their cistern water and they are consuming it, they are at risk for enteric illness. So some of the additional things we have just completed very recently, in July to August, we have worked with Love City Strong and USVI Department of Health to actually complete a larger study where we visited 400 households. So you got to see a little bit of that in the video. But at this point, we need to kind of continue cleaning that data and analyzing it, because it's going to take some time to really tease out this information. But our goal is to come back to the households and be able to have some more additional information on this type of water source, especially because it's used in USVI, but also Puerto Rico, the Caribbean islands also use cisterns. So learning a bit more about how we can create cost-effective options or recommendations for households is the major goal.
So just wanted to ask, partnerships, right, is one of the 5 Ps we're talking about today with Sustainable Development Goals, but how did this partnership come about? It's not so easy, right? Working with government, nonprofit, local community groups, how did that come together?
We were actually at a community briefing just after the hurricanes, and Jonathan Yoder from the CDC and Lieutenant Commander Gooch from the CDC were briefing the community on water quality. And they gave us a good rating, basically. And I was confused because we only have municipal water on the island for about 10% of the population. So I was like, okay, so our water is good, but you were just talking about municipal or everything? And they're like, oh yeah, cistern water isn't really considered infrastructure, so nobody really manages that. So that started the conversation, which sort of grew organically into this project and a variety of others.
Right. And Matt, for you, was there anything, you mentioned in the video that you had never sort of done a data collection project before in this way, right? Probably not in a place that's still recovering from hurricanes. What was something that surprised you, or what surprised you most about the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never seen on-the-ground sample collection work, and I do, in my own personal research, I do a lot of work with survey-type data. So it's really valuable to see kind of what the reality of taking a survey is, because like when you're sitting behind the computer, the numbers look solid. But then when you're in this field, you realize there are all these problems that are really specific, that are important to know and do good analysis. And it was really valuable to get that perspective.
It's nice to see how it translates. Like, you have people out in the field and they don't understand why someone who's analyzing it is asking you, like, where are these gaps, or why are there gaps, or, what does this mean? Why did you answer it like this? And you're trying to tell the person analyzing it, like, this person doesn't want to answer the question the way that we're asking them to. And so it's interesting to have that collaboration so you can see both aspects of the data collection piece.
Great. And what do you think about scaling up? I know this was pilot, you keep saying this is a pilot, but where do you see the project going in the future? Do you think there's a lot more data collection that needs to happen? From the data science perspective, what's sort of the biggest challenge to actually actioning this data?
Yeah, I mean, so the data right now was just for the pilot, but the full study was actually getting at sort of the sample size that we needed to get to answer that primary question of what is the prevalence of E. coli in these cisterns. And so that was through just like our statisticians as well were able to help, and we needed to use kind of like a weighting and a sampling scheme to be able to say we have to kind of hit close to 400 to actually be able to say with some confidence, like with a 95% confidence interval, that what we're finding we can actually have strength in saying. And then in addition, I think ongoing work, there's just always more research questions that develop from one project. So it was a large scale effort, and it took a lot of, I think 51 people that had to sort of volunteer time and cars and vehicles just to actually get this off the ground.
Just the logistics piece, right?
Oh, it was a huge logistics undertaking. Yeah. And people, you might not think of that when you're kind of like wanting to do a project. You say, I want to do it, but how do you actually implement it well so that you're collecting good quality data? Because you can analyze all you want at the back end, but you want to really make sure it's quality.
And one of the cool things I found about the collaboration was that, I came into the project with maybe a different mindset because I hadn't been working on in the weeds so far. And so I had questions that I was really curious about that I'm really excited to try out. Like, for example, well, maybe we go the next step and we ask, what are the most important drivers? Like, they have all this really interesting data about animals nearby. So why don't we see if we can figure out if there's a particular animal that's causing the E. coli to
is most likely to cause the problem. So,
Well, and then to elaborate on that question from our end, with these, multi-agency projects like this, you have one data set, but everybody can utilize it in a different way. So from the federal and the territorial standpoint, you're looking at possible changes in policy or recommendations for usage, et cetera. For our end, being mostly grant funded, we're utilizing this data as an education piece and as a tool to show our grantors that there really is a need for some sort of intervention. And we've already begun that process of installing filtration units. One of the systems Gouthami had mentioned, the sediment filtration in conjunction with the UV filtration, has been proven to make water potable for the most part. And so, we're in the process of doing that. So between this data set that we're getting here and the data collection that we're currently gathering from the pre and post filtration sources, we're able to really combine that and leverage for more funding for us in the future.
Sounds like Matt has some more questions too, and he's going to stay involved in the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Data scientist on loan. Mandy, I know you've been involved in a lot of the process of actually going to homes and collecting that data. Did you ever think when you were starting to work for Love City Strong and you get to know so much about data and data science?
No, Stephen and I both come from the restaurant industry background. So getting into this and working with the CDC and working with Matt and getting all this new information, they've just been so helpful in teaching us the different processes that we need to go and what we need to go through to get all the information that we're able to get to be able to help out in the community.
Informing methodology has been huge because we don't have a background in it. So.
but Stephen's
That's why
really
we do these
impressive job.
projects.
But the great part also is that they're living in St. John, they're living in the islands, so you guys have a context for some of the questions that we're asking, and you get that local context of what it is that we might ask a question, but are we asking it in a way that's going to be received well at a household? And so getting that feedback from Mandy and Stephen has been super helpful in also catering everything to the audience that we're actually trying to help.
Public-private partnership is the new buzzword right now for disaster response. It really is the best way to go about it.
You do get that sense though that having Mandy and Stephen's the kind of local expertise is really important because the Virgin Islands and just the island community in general is very distinct population. So there's a lot of things that they have a nuanced understanding of that outside teams wouldn't necessarily get.
Yeah, a lot of cultural differences and
for sure.
Even per island.
Yeah.
Which you think sometimes if it's just treat US Virgin Islands as one, it's well, they're actually 3 distinct islands. And
Right. We were talking in another panel upstairs with Mayor Whaley from Dayton, Ohio about trust and, how collecting data and what you do with that data, there's this issue of trust with community. And I think working with nonprofit organizations, you really bring that trust to the process. And then you're able to loop the government partners into that. And, it's a broader conversation together, which is great.
Yeah.
yeah, I think the Department of Health has also been really great in supporting all of the work too. So it's kind of just a unified goal and a unified voice that we kind of constantly touch base on to say that the message is going to kind of come out in a strong manner.
Yeah, I think it is nice, seeing this from, seeing the nonprofit side helping out. It's awesome because you guys are in the community. You've been helping out the community since the hurricane, so you do have this sense of trust. People recognize you, and as opposed to maybe just a government agency or just an academic institution, you don't have that level of trust with participants, and that's really important, I think.
Well, it also helps to, being an NGO and having an excellent board and donors, such as Mike Bloomberg and Tom Secunda and, others that support our projects. We have the ability to really just kind of do what we want. I don't really have to go through all the red tape and some of the bureaucracy that happens when you're working on the federal side, and it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just that you have benchmarks and reporting and systems that are in place that you have to make sure you check all of those boxes because there can be a huge mess if you don't do that. We're a little bit more nimble financially in how we can execute certain things and how we can mobilize teams and resources. And so that's why I like that partnership, is like, I can say, well, we really want to work on this, and someone like Gouthami is like, well, that's great, we're going to need 6 months to put this together. And I was like, cool, I'm going to start now, and then we'll collaborate in 6 months, and then you take the reins and then finish that. And so it's a good partnership.
Yeah, the piloting piece, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's just so critical, I think, in terms of allowing yourself that buffer time to work together and find things out and be like, hey, this was happening. Or, I think you saw there was like a leash that we had used to actually collect the water. So it was, but we kind of came up with that because you guys were using a clothing line.
Yeah. They had made this
Improvising.
giant 3-tiered PVC pole system where they had marked off
big.
measurements, and we had actually done the same thing, because you're thinking, okay, well, how am I going to get something down to measure the height of the water, to calculate the volume? And we were using it for a while. It was my idea at the beginning, and then one of our clients pulls out a tape measure and just runs a tape measure down. And Mandy's first thought, correct me if I'm wrong, was just like,
I'm gonna kill Stephen.
dang it, Stephen, like, yeah. And
We've
so
been
then,
putting these 3 poles together, like walking
Yeah.
into the houses with all
you
these
look
giant
like you're,
poles. He pulls out a little tape
vaulting
measure.
into someone's
Yeah.
living room. So then Gouthami and Amy and our colleagues from CDC come down, and they have this pole system. I'm like, oh, it wasn't just me. Like, thank you. Yeah, but it was great, because we were like, no, that doesn't work.
Yeah,
So.
we just need a tape measure, and we're like, great, awesome.
It's a lot of trial and error.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Very much.
Well, it's great. I just want to thank you for all of your work. I think, we really will be excited to see what the next steps are. Maybe next year, come back and share where you are. And
We're, the idea from the data that we collect, like I said, everyone kind of splits off and uses the data in their own way. Our goal is to now look at what possible interventions are available and what we can utilize in the field to help people with treatment, and looking at the best way to manage this like little tiny municipal water system that you have for yourself. Well, what's the most cost effective for the resident? What's the healthiest? And what requires the least amount of work? I mean, you imagine like you're having to treat your own water. You can't do that once a week. It's not possible. So we're trying to utilize this data to further that goal.
we'll be tracking the progress. So
Perfect.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.